What makes a pilot salute a film decades after the smoke has cleared from the English Channel skies? These are not just war movies. They are echoes of courage, terror, and truth told through cockpit glass and burning clouds. Each of these Battle of Britain films dared to capture what it meant to fight with everything at stake. Some were censored, others forgotten, but the pilots never forgot them. Number 15, Angels, 1/5/1952. When Angels 1/5 first hit cinemas, it was hailed as one of the earliest and most authentic depictions of the Royal Air Force's desperate struggle during the Battle of Britain. It lacked Hollywood glamour, no swelling music, no romance subplot, just the mechanical whine of Spitfires and the grim determination of young airmen who knew every flight could be their last. The film followed a fictional squadron commander, balancing duty and exhaustion as his men vanished into the blue. It was made with real RAF cooperation, using genuine aircraft and airfields that still bore wartime scars. Yet its realism became its own controversy. The British government worried it exposed too much about command failures and the emotional toll of leadership. Some veterans reportedly said it felt too close too soon. Behind the scenes, the production was a battle of its own. Filming inside cramped fighter cockpits tested both cast and crew. Cameras overheated. Pilots performing stunts demanded combat-level precision. One sequence depicting a low-altitude dogfight came dangerously close to ending in tragedy when a plane clipped a tree during takeoff. Critics praised its honesty, but the public found it haunting. It was not a celebration of victory, but a study of sacrifice. As decades passed, Angels 1/5 faded from mainstream memory, yet it remained required viewing in RAF mess halls. Pilots respected its unflinching truth. In their eyes, it captured the quiet heroism that no medal could measure. Number 14, Reach for the Sky, 1956. Reach for the Sky was a roaring success upon release, yet behind its triumph lay bitterness and pain. The film told the incredible story of real-life flying ace Douglas Bader, who lost both legs in a crash before the war, but returned to the cockpit to fight again. It starred Kenneth More, whose stiff upper-lip performance made the story an instant national legend. But what audiences did not know was that Bader himself hated it. He believed the film turned his brutal determination into polite heroism. The studio avoided his darker side, his temper and his controversial opinions, fearing they would tarnish the patriotic myth. Even the title, which Bader despised, was a product of studio marketing desperation. Filming was equally turbulent. Director Lewis Gilbert struggled to balance historical accuracy with the demands of the box office. He faced pressure from producers to make Bader's story more inspirational, less human. The result was a sanitized legend that nonetheless moved, yet millions. Real RAF veterans wept in theaters. Years later, Gilbert confessed he wished he could have told the grimmer truth. Bader was a symbol, but also a flawed man of impossible will. Despite the compromises, Reach for the Sky became an enduring piece of British identity. Pilots respected it not because it glorified them, but because it reminded them what sheer stubborn defiance could achieve. To this day, the film stands as both tribute and myth, a reminder that the line between propaganda and pride is sometimes drawn in smoke over the channel. Number 13, The One That Got Away, 1957. Here was the film that dared to flip the perspective. The One That Got Away told the true story of Franz von Vera, a German Luftwaffe pilot who became the only Axis airman to escape from British captivity and return to Germany. At the height of Cold War tension, this film shocked audiences. It asked them to admire the courage of an enemy pilot. Starring Hardy Kruger himself, a German veteran, the film carried a quiet defiance. British tabloids protested that it glorified a Nazi flyer. The studio nearly pulled it after political complaints, but director Roy Ward Baker refused to compromise. He argued that courage knew no uniform and that war's moral boundaries were not as clear as people wanted to believe. The production faced sabotage. Some air bases denied access, fearing backlash. Crew members were harassed for working on a project that humanized the enemy. Kruger received threats, yet continued with quiet dignity. He later said that playing von Vera was his way of making peace with the past. When it finally premiered, the film divided critics but earned deep respect from real pilots, both British and German. They saw truth in its portrayal of professional skill, discipline, and respect among adversaries. No speeches, no moralizing, just survival instinct and the thrill of flight. The One That Got Away endured as an unlikely classic. For pilots, it was a story about the code that bound them beyond politics. For audiences, it was an uncomfortable mirror held up to wartime pride. Its message lingered long after the engines fell silent. Number 12. The Battle of Britain, 1969. This was the grand spectacle. The Battle of Britain was meant to be the ultimate cinematic monument to the RAF. With an international cast led by Michael Caine, Laurence Olivier, and Christopher Plummer, it promised to immortalize the summer of 1940, when the fate of Europe was balanced on the wings of a few. It became one of the most ambitious war productions in history. But ambition came with chaos. The film's realism bordered on madness. Director Guy Hamilton wanted real aircraft, not models. He gathered one of the largest private fleets of Spitfires and Messerschmitts ever assembled. Pilots risked their lives performing dangerous aerial maneuvers, while cameramen dangled from planes to capture the perfect shot. Insurance companies refused to cover it. The skies became a real battlefield once again. The Spanish Air Force provided authentic German planes flown by men who had once served under Franco. Political protests erupted when it was revealed that ex-fascist aircraft were flying over English soil for a British film. Crews faced hostility from veterans and critics who accused the production of turning tragedy into entertainment. Behind the camera, tensions soared. The budget spiraled out of control. Weather delays ruined carefully planned air sequences. Guy Hamilton reportedly clashed with producers over historical accuracy versus cinematic flair. Some RAF veterans loved it. Others said it was too clean, too distant from the terror they remembered. Yet when the film finally premiered, its aerial sequences left audiences speechless. No computer effects, no trick photography, just raw mechanical ballet in the sky. Pilots respected it because it got the physics right. The sound of those Merlin engines was not recreated, it was real. Even decades later, training officers used clips to explain formation combat. The Battle of Britain became both a triumph and a cautionary tale. It celebrated courage, but also exposed how fragile that courage was when filtered through cinema. Number 11. Piece of Cake, 1988. Though made for television, Piece of Cake felt as real and brutal as any feature film. Adapted from Derek Robinson's controversial novel, it followed the fictional Hornet Squadron during the early months of the war. Unlike patriotic films before it, Piece of Cake ripped apart the myth of the flawless British pilot. These airmen were reckless, arrogant, and often terrified. Audiences were stunned. Gone were the clean uniforms and noble speeches. In their place came exhaustion, broken nerves, and moral grayness. Critics accused it of disrespecting the RAF. The Ministry of Defense distanced itself, yet many real pilots privately admitted this version was closer to truth than legend. The controversy grew sharper because the series aired during the late 80s, when Britain was rediscovering wartime nostalgia through parades and pageants. Robinson's story tore that nostalgia down. It showed friendly fire mistakes, political incompetence, and the futility of hero worship. Some broadcasters feared backlash and nearly pulled reruns. Behind the scenes, the production fought its own war. Authentic planes were scarce, so replicas were built at enormous cost. Weather changes forced last-minute rewrites. Actors trained with surviving RAF veterans who told them grim stories that never made the history books. One pilot consultant reportedly walked off set after a scene he said hit too close to memory. Over time, Piece of Cake earned cult status. It was no longer seen as sacrilege, but as realism decades ahead of its time. Flight instructors and historians now use it to teach about early war chaos. Pilots respect it because it refused to lie. It showed that bravery was not about glory, but survival, when the sky itself wanted to kill you. Number 10. Dark Blue World, 2001. Dark Blue World came from the Czech Republic, but its heart belonged to every pilot who ever fought under another nation's flag. The film followed Czech airmen who fled Nazi occupation to join the RAF during the Battle of Britain, only to return home after victory and face persecution under post-war communism. It was both a love letter and a tragedy. Director Jan Sverák captured the exhilaration of flight with haunting beauty, while revealing the bitter truth that not all heroes are celebrated. The film's combination of aerial combat and political betrayal stunned audiences across Europe. But the production faced tremendous pressure. Financing collapsed repeatedly. The Czech government hesitated to fund a film that reopened wounds about collaboration and exile. Even when released, it was attacked by politicians who accused it of being anti-nationalist. Yet veterans embraced it with tears. For many aging Czech pilots, it was the first time their forgotten story reached the screen. To keep costs down, Sverák borrowed aerial footage from the 1969 Battle of Britain film, but blended it seamlessly with new scenes of Czech pilots bantering, laughing, and dying in the same skies. The result felt hauntingly real. Critics praised its emotional depth, but it failed to achieve global success due to limited release. Among pilots, however, it became a quiet masterpiece. They respected its honesty and its understanding that war is not just about enemies, but about belonging and exile. Dark Blue World reminded them that even in victory, some warriors are left behind. Number 9, Malta Story, 1953. Malta Story was not about the Battle of Britain itself, yet pilots still see it as a spiritual companion to that struggle. It told of the British air defense of Malta, the island fortress that held the line against Axis bombers. The film starred Alec Guinness as a reconnaissance pilot torn between duty and survival on an island starving under siege. When it premiered, audiences saw it as a patriotic drama, but for veterans, it cut too deep. The production used real footage from wartime archives, showing the devastation of the Maltese cities and airfields. Some viewers walked out unable to bear the realism. British censors forced editors to tone down several sequences, showing civilian deaths, fearing it might reignite public trauma. Behind the scenes, the film faced an eerie authenticity. Much of it was shot on location among real ruins that still smelled of burned fuel. Locals played extras recreating their own suffering. Alec Guinness wrote that the experience left him shaken, that every scene felt haunted. The film's depiction of pilots facing hunger and isolation instead of glory made it controversial. Critics accused it of undermining morale at a time when post-war Britain needed optimism. Yet, pilots respected it because it showed the loneliness of their war. No parades, no medals, just endurance against impossible odds. Malta Story never became a blockbuster, but its spirit endured. For real airmen, it remains a quiet reminder that heroism often happens unseen, and that the line between victory and annihilation can fit within one bombed runway. Its legacy survives not through spectacle, but through sorrow, carved into stone and sky. Number 8, First of the Few, 1942. Released while the war still raged, First of the Few was both propaganda and prophecy. Directed by and starring Leslie Howard, it told the story of R.J. Mitchell, the engineer who designed the Spitfire. The film celebrated invention as a weapon of freedom, portraying Mitchell as a man racing against illness and bureaucracy to give Britain the machine that would save it. But the film's creation carried eerie weight. Leslie Howard was killed months after its release when his civilian aircraft was shot down by the Luftwaffe over the Bay of Biscay. Many believed the Germans targeted his plane because of his involvement in the film and his anti-Nazi reputation. The tragedy turned the movie into a living elegy. The production faced wartime censorship. The Ministry of Information demanded rewrites to emphasize unity and downplay internal criticism of British industry. Some scenes showing political negligence were cut entirely. Howard's insistence on realism clashed with government advisors who wanted morale-boosting spectacle. He filmed secretly at real airfields using Spitfires in active service. Critics of the time hailed it as inspiring, but veterans later praised it for something else, its sense of melancholy. It captured not just pride, but loss, the cost of brilliance and the fragility of hope in an age of fire. Pilots respected First of the Few because it understood that every aircraft was more than metal. It was the dream of one man who gave everything for the sky. Howard's death sealed that message forever, turning his performance into a ghostly farewell from the very skies he sought to defend. Number 7, The Way to the Stars, 1945. The Way to the Stars was not loud. It whispered. Released just as the war ended, it traced the intertwined lives of British and American airmen stationed on the same airbase. No dogfights, no explosions, just the weary humanity behind the missions. Critics called it subdued, but pilots called it true. The film portrayed life on the ground, letters written home, the ache of waiting the funerals that became routine. It was so intimate that many RAF officers initially resisted it, claiming it lacked heroism. But audiences embraced it precisely because it avoided glamour. Behind the scenes, the production became a memorial in motion. The cast included real servicemen, some of whom died before the film's completion. Director Anthony Asquith built sets inside genuine hangars to capture the echoing emptiness of wartime bases. Every prop from the pilot logbooks to the cigarette tins came. From real donations by squadrons, censors questioned its tone. They feared that a film ending not with victory, but with quiet grief might demoralize a recovering nation. But the producers refused to alter it. When it premiered, veterans reportedly sat in silence through the credits. They said it was the first time a film had shown what the war really felt like from inside the barracks. Its legacy deepened with time. Modern pilots still cite it as one of the most emotionally accurate depictions of service. It was less about winning battles and more about surviving memories. The Way to the Stars remains a soft-spoken anthem for all who flew and never returned. Number 6. 633 Squadron, 1964. 633 Squadron roared onto screens with propellers spinning and guns blazing. It was the first major British war film to feature color widescreen dogfights and roaring orchestral music that made the skies feel alive. The film followed a fictional mosquito bomber unit tasked with destroying a Nazi rocket fuel plant deep in a Norwegian fjord. It was bold, loud, and unapologetically thrilling. Yet beneath the adventure lay a darker truth. Veterans said its daring mission mirrored real operations that ended in tragedy. Many believed it drew inspiration from the true story of Operation Jericho, though the producers never officially confirmed it. Historians accused the filmmakers of glamorizing suicide missions that had cost countless lives. Filming was treacherous. Real Mosquito planes were flown at low altitude through mountain passes for aerial shots. Pilots nearly crashed more than once. Crew members described the thunder of engines echoing through narrow valleys as the closest anyone had come to real combat without bullets. The British press initially dismissed it as pulp fiction, but word spread among RAF circles that 633 Squadron had captured something essential: the adrenaline, the fear, and the unspoken brotherhood. It soon became a training favorite, inspiring generations of air cadets. Its influence reached far beyond its modest success. George Lucas later admitted that the famous Death Star trench run in Star Wars was inspired directly by its climactic attack sequence. For many pilots, 633 Squadron remains the cinematic embodiment of flight under pressure. It may have exaggerated history, but it never faked the feeling. Every pilot who watched it felt the hum of those twin Merlin engines in their bones. Decades later, it survives not as a documentary, but as a memory wrapped in celluloid, a celebration of courage against impossible odds. Number 5. The Dam Busters, 1955. The Dam Busters was Britain's most celebrated aviation epic. It told the story of Operation Chastise, the daring mission to destroy German dams using Barnes-Wallis's revolutionary bouncing bomb. The film's mix of suspense engineering and patriotism made it an instant classic and turned its theme music into an unofficial RAF anthem. But what began as triumph soon became controversy. The real mission had claimed 53 of the 133 airmen who took part. Some survivors felt the film simplified their loss. Others were angered by its softened portrayal of the moral aftermath, the flooding that killed civilians in occupied Europe. The film's heroics were undeniable, but its silence spoke louder. Behind the scenes, it was a logistical nightmare. Special effects crews built scale models of the dams in secret quarries and flooded them repeatedly for test shots. The British Air Ministry insisted on approving the final cut to ensure no classified weapon details leaked. Director Michael Anderson fought to balance accuracy with emotion. He wanted the audience to feel both pride and dread. Years later, censors began removing racially insensitive dialogue, particularly references to the squadron mascot. Some broadcasters even banned the film, temporarily sparking public debate over how history should be remembered. Yet, pilots continued to defend it. For them, the Dam Busters symbolized the precision, courage, and innovation that defined their craft. Its legacy is enormous. Every aviation film that followed borrowed something from its structure and tone. Even now, when the music swells and the bomb bounces across the dam, British pilots still stand a little taller. It is not just a movie. It is the sound of courage echoing through time. Number 4. Aces High, 1976. Though set during the First World War, Aces High earned deep respect from Battle of Britain veterans. It captured the emotional decay that comes with endless sorties and mounting losses, the same despair their generation later endured. Starring Malcolm McDowell and Christopher Plummer, It told the story of young recruits sent to die in the skies before they even learned to fly properly. Audiences expecting adventure got heartbreak. The film portrayed officers cracking under pressure, drinking themselves numb, and sending boys to certain death. Critics called it bleak, but pilots saw truth in every frame. The production refused to use romantic backdrops. It filmed in real aircraft hangars, with period-accurate biplanes restored to flying condition. Stunt pilots risked everything performing real crashes with minimal safety gear. One aircraft was destroyed mid-scene when a stunt went wrong, but the footage remained in the final cut. The British military refused official support, saying the film would harm morale. That isolation forced the crew to rely on independent funding and war memorabilia collectors to supply uniforms and props. It became an act of rebellion against sanitized war cinema. For veterans, Aces High became a parable. It showed that courage can curdle into numbness, that heroism costs the soul, and that leadership can become cruelty disguised as duty. Younger pilots studied it as a psychological case study in fatigue and fear. Decades later, it stands as a haunting mirror of what every generation of airmen faces when the mission outlives the men. Aces High was less about flight and more about falling, and the human cost that follows. Number 3. For Those in Peril, 1944. For Those in Peril arrived while bombs still fell across Europe. Shot in grainy black and white, it was a hybrid between documentary and fiction, made by the Crown Film Unit to honor the Royal Air Force's air-sea rescue crews. These were the men who fished dying pilots out of the Channel, often risking their own lives in the process. It was not glamorous, but it was true. What shocked viewers was its realism. The film used real service members rather than professional actors. Some of them died in combat only weeks after filming. The raw performances gave it a power that few wartime films could match. Scenes of crash landings and frantic rescues were shot under real weather conditions in freezing water. No special effects, no retakes. Censors objected to its tone. They said it looked too bleak, too hopeless for wartime morale. But the filmmakers refused to brighten it. The result was banned from certain overseas screenings for fear it would lower Allied spirits. Within Britain, however, it became a quiet legend among airmen. Pilots said it captured what it really meant to fight gravity as much as the enemy. Behind the scenes, it nearly fell apart. Funding dried up halfway through, and director Charles Crichton had to borrow RAF equipment in secret. The sound department struggled to record dialogue over roaring winds. The film was completed only after volunteers worked without pay. For Those in Peril never became a commercial success, yet its influence can be traced through generations of aviation cinema. It was the first to show the war as routine exhaustion, not endless glory. Pilots respected it for that honesty. It taught them that heroism sometimes meant survival, and survival sometimes meant nothing more than staying afloat until dawn. Number 2. Spitfire, 1942. Spitfire, also known in some territories as the first of the few, shared its title with the aircraft that became a symbol of defiance. Released at the height of the war, it was meant to rally Britain's courage, and it did, but not in the way the propaganda ministry expected. It followed the real-life story of R.J. Mitchell, the visionary designer who built the Spitfire while battling terminal illness. Leslie Howard's portrayal turned him into a national saint, but the message was less patriotic and more tragic. Mitchell's passion for flight destroyed his health. His dream machine would live on while he did not. Government censors interfered constantly. They wanted a tale of triumph. Howard wanted a tale of obsession. Whole sections were rewritten under pressure to avoid portraying industrial neglect or bureaucratic delay. Some scenes showing conflict between engineers and politicians were quietly removed. Filming was done partly in secrecy because airfields were still active. Crews worked under blackout conditions. Planes took off for real missions between takes. Actors were warned that if the air raid siren sounded, they would have to drop cameras and run for shelters. Howard's death in 1943, when his plane was shot down by the Luftwaffe, turned the film into a prophetic tragedy. Audiences watched it again, knowing the man who made it had fallen victim to the same war he sought to honor. Pilots across generations have revered Spitfire not as entertainment, but as scripture. It captured the soul of the machine that carried them through terror and triumph. It showed that genius could be born from pain, and that the finest wings were built not for glory, but for survival. Number 1. The Battle of Britain, Their Finest Hour, 2010. While many films looked backward, this modern documentary drama looked inside. The Battle of Britain, their finest hour, combined real combat footage, digital reconstructions, and surviving pilot testimonies. It was not fiction, it was remembrance brought to life. Pilots who had fought in the original battle sat before the camera with trembling hands and steady eyes. They spoke not of victory, but of fear. They described nights of sleepless waiting, the smell of oil and blood, the sound of engines that became both lullaby and curse. The director refused to use dramatic narration, letting the veterans tell their own truth. Controversy followed its release. Some critics accused it of being too raw, too slow. Others praised it as sacred. What made it powerful was silence. Between the testimonies came the drone of Spitfires echoing like ghosts. Modern pilots called it the most accurate depiction of aerial combat emotion ever filmed. The production faced heartbreak. Several veterans featured in the early shoots died before completion. Their voices became posthumous farewells. The editing team refused to replace or dramatize missing parts instead, leaving pauses as living memorials. The film's limited theatrical run gave way to military screenings across bases worldwide. In training academies, it became a teaching tool, not for tactics, but for humility. Younger pilots watched it to understand what courage really meant when the world was on fire. For the men who once flew through the summer of 1940, this was not nostalgia. It was closure. Their finest hour reminded them that history is not written by victors, but by survivors who still remember the faces behind every call sign. From roaring Spitfires to whispering ghosts, these films reveal what history books cannot. The sound of hearts beating against impossible skies. Each frame holds the echo of youth duty and loss. Which of these stories spoke most to you? Which battle still rages in your memory? Like this video, subscribe, and share your thoughts below to keep their legacy alive.